Right then, nearly there. Post 3. This is in some ways perhaps the most challenging post, actually. We've just been talking in this group comfortingly about how we think we've got it taped. But now I'm going to say this is the most difficult bit. This is the bit, post 3, where you're actually going to talk about implementation of it. And one of the things to do before you start writing post 3 is a good idea is to actually discuss with your mentor and colleagues the impact that it has had on the setting. And this will be different according again to who has been involved in the training, how it has been implemented. So is it something which everybody in the setting has been on, so that you've all kind of bought into it at the same time? Is it something that one person has been on and is expected to cascade the training down? Is it something that one of you has taken up as a particular interest and you are now trying to disseminate that because it's something that you're passionate about? So this is something to discuss with your mentor and your colleagues about the impact that it's going to have on the setting, because again, depending on those particular circumstances, that will be something that is quite different. Then the next part of it really is how you consider, and if the word consider is in there, that's a bit of a clue that you're going to want to be having to do something slightly analytical. Consider how to use the training to develop quality of practice. And this is where you will need to think about issues such as teamwork, about responsibility, about leads in practice, your role within the team, etc. So, for example, if it is something practical, let's go back to our first aid example. If it's something like first aid, then the impact on the practice and improving the training might be something like, has it affected the way responsibility is shared within the setting? Could you perhaps then introduce some new type of practice? For example, there are changes in CPR techniques that have come in recently. Is that something that you could disseminate with your colleagues? Could you check your first aid equipment and see whether or not you think it's fit for purpose? Is there something new that you could introduce, and how would you take responsibility for that? Or does having had everybody have their training updated mean that the whole setting is a lot more confident and that you might be more adventurous about the activities that you do or the outings that you do as a result of it, because you don't have to worry about whether or not you've got a first aider with you, you automatically know that you will have that sort of impact. If it is something like observing and assessing, then how is that being trickled down? Is it one person who's going to trickle it down? Is that something you're going to take responsibility for in the team to disseminate the information? Might that mean you leading a short bit of a staff meeting? Might you have some handouts that you could disseminate and talk to colleagues about informally? How will that impact on the team? And sometimes the team roles are an important part of this discussion, because occasionally what happens is that we have changes in setting, changes in expertise, where some people in the setting are very keen to buy into it and change the way they practice, and some people are less so. So taking the example of observing and assessing, you might query the way in which observing and assessing has been done. So for example, if you look at how observing and assessing alters your planning, you might look at somebody's narrative observations and question actually what is of value within that observation. Sometimes people write a very, very long narrative and then they don't really use it. They're not really focused about what information they're taking out of it, and it isn't really particularly valuable, and that's something that you're going to challenge. So if you were going to challenge, what issues might that cause within the team? What responsibility would you take? Who would you draw on for support in carrying practice forwards? So that whole kind of team roles and team values might be part of that discussion. It might not, but it's the kind of thing that you might be discussing. And if you're going to look at team roles and team values, the sorts of references that you might draw on would be things like resistance to change, motivation to change. They're the sorts of things that you would be researching. The other thing that you will be considering are responsibilities within the team. So if you are in a relatively senior post, you might be somebody who is automatically responsible for disseminating practice. You might be somebody who has a lot of responsibility and authority to change practice if you want to, and you would consider that in terms of your practice role. Or you might be somebody who is relatively new to the team or working as a volunteer within the team, in which case you have to consider the way you would like to implement practice differently. It might not be possible for you to make the changes in practice, but what you would be concluding with is how it could improve quality, how that training, how it could improve quality. And again, for those last couple of references for the quality improvement section, you might be looking at the quality wheel on the Ofsted framework. You might be looking at Ofsted requirements and examples of best practice. You might be looking at the EYFS and welfare requirements. You might be referring back to some of the EPI studies or REPI studies that say what good practice is within a setting. And you can just basically round it up with saying a very brief, you don't have to do a proper conclusion in the way that you would in a lengthy assignment, just a sort of a concluding sentence about overall the effectiveness or the benefit of the training has been whatever it has been. Like I say, because it's a discussion posting, you don't have to come to a formal conclusion about it. You can stop there. Remember to put your references in at the bottom of your third posting, and good luck.